Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam. Good morning. Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Today is Tuesday, February 15th, 2022. I got the date right. I'm going for about a week now without forgetting in the moment. But good morning, everybody. You are listening to the 8th, I believe, episode of Your Healthy Java, which is sponsored by the Office of Equity and Community Health out of the Massachusetts General Hospital. And today we have the pleasure of talking with a cardiologist who's going to talk with us about heart health. And so I am not going to further the time in bringing our guest into the room, but we wanted to also say hello to our co-host and medical director, Dr. Claude Alabre, as well, to bring him in and say good morning to you. Good morning, Dr. Alabre.
Good morning. Good morning, Java fam.
How are you, sir? How was your heart day?
I think it's good. I got some cardio yesterday, so we're good.
Okay. And before we bring Dr. Gousset in, why, and we're going to ask him why he went into cardiology, but why do you think it's important? Yes, there was a theme around, Valentine's Day, but why is it important out of all the things we've talked about so far, Dr. Alabre? Why did you think it was important to talk about heart health?
Yeah, I mean, I like to say everything we talk about is important, but we only talk about important things here. I mean, it is certainly a very critical part of health. Obviously, it is also Heart Health Month, and so we wanted to sort of tag on to that and talk about what's going on in that area. We do know we need our heart. We just can't really do much without it. And there's a lot of unknown and misunderstanding out there about heart health and what we need to do. And today, particularly, we want to talk about the things you may not feel or know, but will have a huge impact on your health. And we'll get more into it soon.
There was a term you reminded me of when we were backstage a few moments ago, silent killers. And so we're going to talk about that. But right. I will give you the opportunity to go ahead and introduce Dr. Gousset. I'm going to get ready to bring him in. But if you just want to tell folks a little bit about him or just your own way, introduce him and we'll bring him in.
Sure. Where is it?
Here he is.
Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Gousset. And actually, I'll have him introduce himself a little bit. He's one of the cardiologists at MGH and has been there a few years now and does some work in prevention and other parts of heart health in general. So please go ahead, Dr. Gousset.
Sure. First, I just want to say thank you both for having me on and for doing this. I think this is it's special to be able to be a part of this. Dr. James Gousset, I'm a cardiologist at Mass General. I've been at Mass General for a few years now, did all of my training here. And again, it is Heart Month. And I think one of the reasons that I got into it is not only because I think cardiology is cool and interesting, but I think, when you go into medicine, it's never clear exactly what someone's going to do oftentimes. But when I was practicing and sort of seeing patients at Mass General, I think what I found interesting about heart disease is that one, it's treatable, and two, it makes you think back to your family. Like it's touched members of my family. I think it's probably touched members of most people's family. And then when you really start to look around you see how compelling the epidemiology is. It's everywhere. And we don't, it felt like growing up, I didn't talk about that a lot, but it's the number one, after COVID now, it's the number one killer. Heart disease and stroke, we sort of wrap them together because they're really caused oftentimes by the same thing. But that's sort of how I got into it. I take care, as Claude said, I take care of patients, and I'm focused on cardiovascular health, particularly as it relates to exercise. I see athletes as well. I care a lot about sudden cardiac death, and I care a lot about preventing heart disease because if you can prevent it, that does a world of good. So I'll pause there.
I'm glad, and no necessarily need to pause. We could have heard more from you. One of the things that Dr. Alabre and I and Cindy and folks at MGH are very honest about is that because of various valid reasons, Black and brown people sometimes have issues with trusting the medical community. And we heard passion from you. We heard it's personal for you. And so I just want to highlight that because I always think it's important that our guests be touchable to our viewers. So I thank you for being that transparent, because you saw it when you were talking about it. You said it was cool. You know what I mean? And so for us, we're like, okay, how can studying the heart be cool? But that just it just shows your passion for it. So we definitely wanted to name that. Dr. Alabre, one of the things that you have talked about before is the importance of like screening and being in front of. And so I realized that Dr. Gousset has said that as well. And so what are some of the trends that are, sort of plaguing us, or what are you finding in treating patients throughout the years?
Oh, sorry. Is that for me or is that for Claire?
I'm sorry. That's for you, sir.
Got it. No, I mentioned earlier how, I don't know if this is a good time to share some of the slides, but I mentioned how heart disease really is the number one killer. When you look at so on the next slide, of the next 3 people that pass away, one of them will be from heart disease and stroke. And then we see a lot of disparities across different racial and ethnic demographics. And so, on the next slide, you'll see that, when you look at Black men and Black women, on average, there's a significantly increased rate of fatal heart disease and stroke when you sort of look across racial demographics. And although I think over the last decade or so, there have been improvements in how we treat heart disease and how we identify it, I think it's fair to say that those improvements have not necessarily been shared equally across all demographics. And so still, it's, you look at Black men and Black women, still, heart disease and stroke still in the top of the list for preventable death. And part of this contributes to sort of what I want to talk about in the next slide is that when you look at life expectancy, someone born today, a Black boy or Black girl born today is expected to live 3 to 4 years shorter than their white counterparts. And part of that is due to this disparity that we see in heart disease prevalence and in heart disease death. And the American Heart Association is, I think they've been a leader in talking about this, and they've tried to come up with simple ways to try to make it clear how we might be able to improve our cardiovascular health. And so on the last slide, I'll just point out that they've sort of gone on a campaign to talk about Life Simple 7. If we can get everyone to sort of stop smoking, to be active, to control your cholesterol, manage your blood pressure, eat healthy, lose weight, and watch blood sugars. That if you could just get to 5 of these, you can have a substantial, almost an 80% reduction in cardiovascular risk. I'll say that of these 7, if I had to pick one in the African American community, I think arguably the most potent risk to cardiovascular health in the Black community is one of the silent ones. Is just high blood pressure. The prevalence is high. You don't necessarily feel it, but you could be living with it's right there in the middle. You could be living with a high blood pressure, and just going about your day. And we are all healthy until we're not, and so it's one of those that I think it's important to communicate to friends, to family, that we gotta watch. We want to be active. We want to eat healthy. But I think one of the tangible things we want to know that isn't really obvious if you're not checking it is what is your blood pressure.
Thank you for that. Dr. Alabre, if I remember, I always want to put you in emergency medicine, but in seeing your patients in this particular case, because of my familiarity with medicine, at the point that you're being referred to Dr. Gousset, where are you? If you're making a referral, like where, because we talk about preventive care and screenings. And so we are going to talk about, ways of preventing, specifically hearing from our cardiologist, but in a preventive routine manner, what have you seen coming in? And then when they get to the point of going to him, a couple of things in there, but.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's somewhat a little hard to really fully answer because it varies so much in terms of how people approach care, and even how we deliver care, to be honest, because it varies from provider to provider a little bit. We know that prevention is key for a lot of the diseases and problems we talk about and deal with. Unfortunately, there's not always a lot of time dedicated to that, because people tend to wait till that time when they start to have symptoms and problems start to creep up. As we mentioned before, those silent killers. And then there is the aspect of, again, as Dr. Gousset mentioned, the no symptom diseases that they're eating you slowly but surely, but you don't feel it, you don't know it. And so to sort of answer your questions, it depends on when the patients actually get to me. I think part of what we're talking about in the disparities is also access, either because of structure or because of personal decisions and knowing and I guess realizing the need to have that care done at that level in your life. And so we always talk about when is a right time, a good time to start seeing your doctors. It's really from birth. And we do have systems in place where we sort of have that annual check-in. And that's all part of that reason where you're going to get that blood pressure check. You're going to talk about your diet and your exercise and everything else. And so we now have dedicated specialty clinics also for prevention. And so when we identify someone as being high risk, either because of family history or because of the initial test that we do, cholesterol, blood pressure, there are now starting to be more of a focus on let's get these people in that clinic where they're going to get all the attention they need to be able to prevent that, unwanted outcome of a heart attack and strokes. And so we do obviously a lot of that prevention in primary care. And so again, it depends on how high risk you think that person is and how comfortable you are with taking care of them, or even just having the resources to devote to that prevention sometimes can dictate where they go and how they end up in cardiology or in stay with primary care.
Thank you, Dr. Alabre. Dr. Gousset, where are you seeing, what are the trends by the time they come to you? Dr. Alabre, thank you for naming that, timing is definitely important. And so I want to maybe come back to you at some point and see if there are, besides cholesterol, I guess those are the routine and preventive care for this space. But what are you seeing, Dr. Gousset, in trends by the time they're coming to you? What are some of the trends you've seen lately? Have they changed during COVID? Because COVID does different things to the heart or the body. What are the top 2 or 3 trends you're seeing right now? And if you could, specifically among Black and brown patients?
Yeah, no, I think these are important questions. So I think before COVID, when I saw most patients are referred to me after they've had a cardiac event. So if they're older, and so, the median age of a heart attack in men and women is sort of 65 in men and 72 in women. So it's usually around that age that folks will get referred to me after they've had a small or big heart attack or some abnormal heart rhythm. So that's been like the dominant trend. If they're younger, and say you're 20 years old, African American man, and you play a sport, you had a family, maybe a brother or a father who died suddenly at a young age, that's another time that I'll get sort of the referral, sort of on those two spectrums. After COVID, there's been a huge pause, I think, and then a resurgence. And so I think, even before COVID, I have to say, in the winter months when people were getting, respiratory infections, we would see a spike in cardiovascular events. So that's, there's the seasonality to it. And so COVID has just been a big 2-year season where we're seeing a lot of heart attacks and we're seeing a lot of cardiovascular events superimposed on the Black community that was already having a lot of them to begin with. And so that's generally what we're seeing. But yeah, particularly now that we're seeing there's a lot of concern about younger individuals who, may get COVID, and then when they try to do activity again, may have some symptoms. Most of those have been very manageable. I got to be honest. It's mostly the folks who are getting closer to 55 to 75, who have COVID, who have diabetes, who have high blood pressure, who may or may not have known it. And that coupled with the stress of life now has triggered a cardiovascular event. And so the trends aren't too different. It's just that you could tell that they're just much more acute now. There's just a lot. It's just much more concentrated now.
Okay, it is so interesting. Go ahead, Dr. Labre.
Sorry, I wanted to take a step back a bit, because part of the reason we wanted to have this conversation today is also because it's Black Month, Black History Month, and we could have wanted to also add that flavor to our discussions about health and how this affects the Black community. And I know Dr. Goose has already referred to it a little bit. What I wanted to ask is, what is that? Can you speak to a little bit about what makes heart health a little bit different for Blacks than others? Is it genetics? Is it culture? Is it habits? Is it access? Is it care? Is it on the part of the providers or on the part of the patients, or probably a combination? But I'll let you speak. Why is it different?
Yeah. So parts of that conversation we know a lot more about, and some we know a lot less about. I think when you look at society, right, where do Black and brown people live? It's just very different than where everybody else lives. And so your access to healthy food, your ability to have green spaces and therefore walk around and be active and be safe, those are just fundamentally different. It's just fundamentally different, even in Boston, right? And so I would start there. And we talk about structural and institutional racism, but I would start there as the Black community lives in a different place, writ large across America, and I think you can explain a lot of the differences from that. And so when you have more stress and you don't have access to healthcare and you don't have access to food, it's not surprising that your blood pressure is going to be higher, and it's not surprising that you might put on more weight. And it's not surprising that you might smoke to ease that stress, right? And so it's so hard to disentangle all the different causes. But I think fundamentally there's a structural one. And so I think all of those things contribute to why we see differences, I think, in care. And I think we just have to be attuned to that. We have to work harder to provide access. We have to work harder to highlight, that we're a population at risk.
I was mentioning to Dr. Gousset, we would take questions toward the end, and I told him they would start early on. And we see some comments, and to Quincy, he just really addressed that around healthy food deserts, within Black and brown communities. And so, Dr. Labre, if you don't mind, I want to ask one personal question, and I know we have a few more things to cover, but when we were talking about healthy eating with Dr. Fatima, I think it was you or someone that named that period between January 26th,
Hmm.
December 26th, or January 5th? Can Dr. Labre, you clarify, and then Dr. Gousset, if you can go a little bit deeper, because that stood out to me. Though we are post that period, it just, I think if we can keep people cognizant next year and save a life, it's important. But what's this thing with more heart attacks over that December 26th to January 5th period? If I have it right, Dr. Labre.
Right. No, you have it right. I had mentioned it. I don't remember the exact statistics, but there's definitely a spike in heart attacks around that time. And we actually talked about it more in the context of increased stress. And there are more than one factor, obviously. It's really, a lot of this is obviously lifestyle. So much changes around the holidays. Again, stress being a big one, lack of sleep, food habits changing, not going to your general preventive routine care because, again, holidays, traveling. And so there's a lot. And we can, as Dr. Goose said, in terms of the factors he's seeing in his world right now in terms of increased heart attack, but there's that statistics out there.
No, yeah, no, and that's absolutely true. And I got to say that, and there's some folks in our cardiology division at Mass General who have dedicated their research efforts to this topic. And so I'll just highlight Dr. Ahmed Tawakal and Dr. Mike Osborne. You know, they've looked at neuroimaging of individuals, like looking at the brain, to look at chronic psychological stress. It lights up these fear centers in the brain, the amygdala. And we know that independent of everything, like you could have two twins, one that's living with psychological stress and one that's not, one that's in, a more challenging environment and one that's not. And independent of, all the things that cause heart attacks, they're going to have a higher risk of future cardiovascular events. And I think that's powerful because, we talk about these preventable, I showed you the Life Simple 7, but stress isn't on there, right? Stress isn't on there. But if you're stressed, exactly, you're going to have higher weight. If you're stressed, you're going to sleep less. If you, not only do you sleep less, the quality of that sleep is less. And some of that might be from having higher weight and sleep apnea, something that is another silent thing that a lot of us don't realize we have is, poor quality sleep. That leads to high blood pressure, which sort of all feeds right back into sort of these seven these seven modifiable factors. But I think recognizing that the stress from our environment results in biological changes is I think some profound work that we and others from Mass General and in other places across the country are starting to recognize and talk more about. But I'm glad you brought it up.
Can you say that again? Dr. Labre knows when we hear these certain statements, I need you to say it for the people in the back. And what you said was about the biological. Say stress does what? Say that again slowly.
Yeah, exactly. Stressful environments and just stressful lives, these things lead to biological changes. And those biological changes, they're not because your biology is different. They're because your body is adapting to the stress. Does that make sense? And
it does, but then I'm sorry, Dr. Labre, we don't want to be laughs. What it does is demystifies, because there is a lot of speculation around Black and brown folks. The reason we deal with health disease issues. Now, do we sometimes not eat the healthiest things? And there's a lot of historical context to that and all of that. Yeah. But you just said something so profound there. We're not biologically necessary, different ethnicities have different DNA constructs or whatever, but you talk about the external influences when I guess the example you brought up about the two twins. And so it's so, while I think a lot of us know that inadvertently, to hear you say that is just, is Dr. Labre is one of those, I heard it and I'm like, wait a minute, he's saying something there that I think we need to really make sure we capture and highlight. So you struck a chord there. Sorry.
Yes, that's all good. And I think there was a question. I don't know if you want to get to that.
If we can go to the questions if you would like.
Yeah, you can put it up.
One of the things that I can put up here, and Naraki, he was Dr. Gousset was already talking about it, but doesn't stress have a lot to do with heart attacks and strokes. He addressed that. To Heidi Lewis, we are actually, is it next month, Dr.
In 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, we are dedicating Heidi Ivy a whole show to women's health, and we'll talk about cardiovascular health.
Women's health. Yeah.
Yes, women's heart health specifically. And so we're doing that. But just for the sake of, because it was brought up here, is there anything you would want to share, Dr. Bousset, around specifically women and women of color that you know right now? We'll go deeper in a couple of weeks.
No, I think absolutely. You know, I think about different parts of the lifespan. So I think about younger women who are pregnant. You know, we're seeing, you know, more cardiovascular events in that population. And so I think it's important, you know, see your OB, talk about your cardiovascular risk factors, and just make sure that, you know, when you feel something that isn't right, whether or not you're younger or you're older, and particularly if you feel something that happens every time you move, these are times that you should talk to either your primary care physician or talk to a doctor. I think, you know, one of the things that in heart disease that I think we focus a lot on, and, you know, we dramatize, is someone that comes to you with chest pressure, you know, or chest pain. But chest pain and chest pressure aren't the only signs of a heart attack. And that, you know, if I walk up a hill and I get a toothache, every single time I walk up that hill, you should talk to you should talk to your primary care doctor or your cardiologist, because any kind of physical stress that is causing you a really reproducible discomfort, you don't feel well doing it, that can be attributable to your heart. And so I find that, you know, folks of us on the older side of the spectrum, there are a lot of silent symptoms that, you know, we're very good at being like, you know, we're very good at sort of dismissing them, you know, and we're very sort of resilient to the stress in a way, in that we will say, you know, I'm just fine. It's just had a bad day. You know, but then you're not going out and you're not checking the mail anymore, and you're not going upstairs, and you're finding ways to take an escalator and an elevator because you just don't feel good doing the stairs. You should talk to somebody about that. And then yeah, in the younger end, I think, you know, young women are not immune to cardiovascular disease, particularly young Black women. And I think we're starting to learn more about what's happening around pregnancy. It's not something that we've studied enough of. I hope you guys talk a little bit more about that. But, you know, gestational hypertension and gestational diabetes, these are things that we see concentrated in our population, and that need to be sort of talked about, addressed, discussed, and managed. And I think cardiologists are starting to get a lot more involved in that as well. It's another reason I love cardiology. In some ways, we're an invasive species. You know, we don't just look at the heart, but because I think we recognize that it's essential science, and it's about your whole health, and how long you live is, you know, the heart's trying to support that, but it's not the only thing.
Thank you. Anything to add?
Can you stress? What's that? Yeah, I was gonna say, can you stress, Dr. Bousset, in terms of when something should really, I know you mentioned it, I just kind of really repeated and reiterated and stressed it, that when to be concerned. We sometimes talk about being predictable, sort of like you expect it to happen in that situation every time, as opposed to this one time something happened that may not quite be concerning. But as you mentioned, if it's every time you do the stairs or every time you do this, also in terms of that it's related to activity, or it's sort of just gonna put a little emphasis on that so people know really when to be concerned.
I'll say three things. Yeah. So if you feel anything between your belly button and your ear, like every single time you do something, like some people will say, oh, I get this shoulder pain every time I climb the stairs, or you know, I had a family member who, like, every time I walked the dog, had this discomfort in the chest, right? If there's something that's very reliable, you say more, and sometimes it's not 100% of the time, but usually when I'm talking to folks, I'm saying, you know, what's the chance you think you're going to feel that thing if you walked upstairs right now? If they say over 50%, then I consider that reliable. And then oftentimes that symptom isn't like for seconds, it's usually for minutes. So it's not like 2 or 3 seconds, you know, my shoulder hurt for 2 or 3 seconds. You know, it's like, oh, I had this thing in my shoulder right after shoveling snow for 3 or 4 minutes.
That one.
And then and then I also think that there are sort of two unacceptable things that when I'm talking to folks, I like to just clarify. So one is if you go to bed at night and you can't lay flat when you go to sleep, it's worth talking to your doctor about why that is. So, some people have back pain.
Yeah.
Some people, I'm just not comfortable laying on my back. But another thing that's just concentrated among the African-American population is the syndrome of heart failure, where your heart isn't pumping well and you're holding on to extra salt and extra water. And oftentimes folks will just say, I'm short of breath, or I have a little bit of swelling in my feet. But one of the questions I ask people are like, are you able to sleep laying flat? Because if you can't sleep laying flat, for me, you have heart failure until proven otherwise, just because the epidemiology is so common. It's so common. We have we have salts everywhere.
Can you do me one quick favor? Can
Yeah.
you define epidemiology for folks that don't?
Right.
That you're good. You're good.
Yeah. No. Yeah. When I say the epidemiology, I just mean it's just very common. That when I say it's compelling, it's heart failure. This inability of the heart to pump blood well around the heart, often leading to shortness of breath. Some people will see swelling in their ankles. Some people see sort of blood and water back up into the lungs. It leads to shortness of breath. And so then when you lay flat, people will often say, I'm short of breath laying flat. And so that's why I don't go to sleep. But the brain is an interesting thing because, some people will come up with a lot of reasons why they can't lay flat. And so I'll sit them down in the clinic and I'll just lay them flat. And they'll be like, no, I'm not comfortable doing that. It's not my back. It's just that I just don't feel good when I'm laying flat. That's one sign that I find is sort of unacceptable. And then the other is you can't climb 2 flights of stairs without having discomfort or shortness of breath out of proportion to the effort. Those are things that merit a conversation with your physician. If you're having trouble doing those things, the heart is involved in both of those things. So if you're having trouble doing those things, it's worth having that conversation. With heart failure, we can usually tell on the exam. So we can just do a quick exam and see, you're holding on to extra water, you're holding on your neck veins, which we can see sort of how much water is in the body and the neck just by looking at the neck. These are things that we focus on and sort of in cardiology, and in particular, heart failure, I think is another one of those things that we find concentrated in the Black population.
One of the things I heard from you, which you described, are a lot of things that growing up, sir, and even now in our community, and I'm guilty, not in the details of that, but for various reasons that we've named before around disparities, around inequities in care, a lot of what you describe. A lot of people in our community, they just pass off and it becomes a normal way of life and they get through it until, as you all said, there's an incident. So I'm understanding even more now why you all refer to these as silent killers, because a lot of what you named to the 65-year-old BPS janitor that just got a few more years to retire, doesn't want to mess up health insurance and miss work, they'll deal with that for 2 years if their body allows.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I heard from you, is that we have to be very more intentional about, and I'm looking in the camera when I say this, about our health. And when we see issues going on, that we have to address it. And the last thing, and I'll give it back to Dr. Labrie, was it's similar to the central nervous system. The cardiovascular system basically is responsible for hydrating, or not hydrating, but with blood, but oxygenating every other part of the body. So your heart health is majorly important, correct?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And actually, with what you were just saying there to Jimmy, I wanted to ask Dr. Gusa if he can talk a little bit about early detection. So what's the outcome difference in catching these things early and seeking care versus waiting until that last minute when things really...
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have numbers on it, but it can be transformative in your quality of life, right? Like, if I see you at the age of 45 and I see that your cholesterol is through the roof, or that your blood pressure is, sky high, and I can treat those things, you can live well treated, you could live a very long life, as opposed to you come in at 65 having a major heart attack, and say your pump function is is cut in half, like the heart isn't squeezing very well. You're not going to feel good. You're not going to be able to do those stairs. You're not going to be able to walk around. And we're getting much better at treatments. And we have a whole specialty of advanced heart failure where we can try to manage that. But you much prefer not to have to see an advanced heart failure doctor if you don't have to. And so prevention should be the key for the general population. We should be trying to identify those silent things that we know predict that future heart attack, that we know predict heart failure. And sort of seeing your primary care doctor, talking about that, specifically if it's happened in your family to others. I'm sure it has. Say that you're worried about that, and how can we reduce our risk? And having that conversation. Sometimes your primary care doctor is happy to talk to you about it. Sometimes you're such a high risk that it might be worth having a chat with your conversation with a cardiologist. And oftentimes I work with primary care doctors so that you're not just having it once a year, you're having it a couple of times a year, in particular if you're at high risk for heart disease of any form.
Thank you, Dr. Gousset. We have a question. What about the leg veins? Are they assigned? I guess when you refer to the neck, it's causing. Wanted to ask.
Yeah, you have to be clear about it. So some people just have plump leg veins where you can see. We call them varicosities. We don't worry too much about those. There's another form when the whole leg is sort of swollen and you touch it and it makes a pit, and it's happening in both legs. That isn't always heart failure, but it's often heart failure. And so hard to diagnose without seeing it, but usually just like spider veins or plump veins is a slightly different thing.
We have another question here from Karen Gerald from Boston. What are the causes for heart failure? There's a Boston coming out for a healthy person who works out regularly and does not smoke or drink. Good question, Karen.
It's a great question. And so these are things that we get interested in. Half the times heart failure is from you had a heart attack and your heart is weak. But sometimes the other half we don't know as much about. We call it idiopathic cardiomyopathy. Your heart has become weak for a reason that we don't know. When we don't know, we call it idiopathic. Okay. But there are certain diseases that are somewhat concentrated in the African American population. One is called amyloidosis. It's this sort of blood-borne disease where proteins made in your blood deposit in the heart, and that is one of the unusual ones where there is somewhat of a genetic basis to it. And so that's one that we and there are now treatments for. It's important. I have a good friend who studies this, but that I think that's one of them. But oftentimes we don't know, to be honest with you. Oftentimes we don't know the etiology. But what's interesting is even when we don't know, we can still treat it. And we can have people whose hearts go from very weak, and we get them on the right medications, and then they're completely back to normal, which I think is just miraculous. And you'll hear us talk a lot about guideline-directed medical therapy, because we know that when we get you on these medications, people do better. But those are some examples, yeah.
Do you want to speak a little bit to the effect of alcohol in heart failure as well, the connection there?
Yeah, and so there are some people that we observe are sensitive to, their heart is sensitive to alcohol. It's not everybody, because there are some people that drink a lot and their heart seems fine. But there are some people whose heart are sensitive to alcohol, where when they drink, their heart gets weaker. And oftentimes, if you can get them to reduce or stop alcohol altogether, their function improves. But thanks, God, that's another example of reversible cause of heart failure in someone that might otherwise, look healthy. There are one of the other forms of heart disease that we see in young folks is just it's not necessarily heart failure, but it's a thick heart. and there's a disease called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. This one is genetic. It's in both, blacks and whites. It's in everyone, but there is an interesting interaction with it in sports. If you have that and you do exercise a lot, or you play, for some reason we see this in African American men who play collegiate basketball. That's when it happens. The interaction of having this sort of thick heart disease with high intensity sport puts you at risk for sudden death. And so that's one thing that we pay a lot of attention. And you probably have all seen it sort of on the news, and when someone who's sort of young, healthy, robust just passes away suddenly. And this is why, again, I emphasize, you got to talk to your members of your family, ask, has this happened in our family before? Has there been an unexplained death? Has someone died really young and we couldn't explain it? Those are the people that I like to examine closely for this disease called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or a thick heart.
Can I just mention something here, Dr. Labrie, real quick? And we understand amongst our Black and brown brothers, there is a huge desire to be in the NBA. And these young people go hard and they work out. So are you saying that if we have one of those young people that sort of, is a little star, exceptional, that they might want to talk with their primary care doctor and give some consideration, even in high school or whatever, to maybe think about getting a cardiology not triage, or what do you call it? What's
screening?
Screening. Yes.
Yeah.
Labrie. That is worth doing that if you have one of those, and not just basketball, but as I'm listening to you, I'm hearing it through a lens of some things by my experience within my community that that we deal with, but then I'm also hearing solutions that if we know of that little 19, 20-year-old basketball player, and there was somebody in the past in the family that had a cardiology issue, you might want to mention that to the doctor if they're this rising star. Because when you say college basketball, I'm thinking about all the NBA stars we heard of that just dropped dead on the court and all of that. So interesting.
Yeah. And that's one of the key things too, as he was mentioning, is knowing your family history. And if it's happened, you should raise it to your doctors and say, hey, this might be something genetic, something I need to know about and be evaluated for.
One other question we have, Dr. Labrie, and you kind of talked to it, Dr. Gusa, is are any of these diseases hereditary? Some are, some aren't. And I think we said a few minutes ago in one of my moments of passion is that it is a belief that a lot of these, there's a term that I came up with a while ago called environmentally hereditary. It's not, Is it true? Because the environment, and you talked about this a few minutes, I forgot about that.
There is an actual term for that, Jimmy, but I like yours.
I like that one.
The environment, asthma may not be for some, caused genetically, but if they grew up in the same neighborhood where auntie got it. So I'm sorry, go ahead. It's one of those moments, Dr. Labrie. I'm trying.
I like it.
Dr. Labrie, go ahead.
I thought you were going to talk a little bit about the connection between environment and genetics. I don't know if you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things we see, I think it's always important to emphasize that race is a construct, right? That but biologically we aren't that different. But what is important is that there's a lot of human variation across across humanity, right? Mm-hmm. And we have varying different susceptibilities to different things, particularly. But it shouldn't be a surprise, though. I think that if you live in a food desert and there are no green spaces, and all you can get to is a Popeyes. I love Popeyes, but I'm just saying if all you can get to is
keep it real,
right? It shouldn't be surprising that it may be harder to exercise in that context. It may be harder. You will likely gain weight in that context, and you will have high blood pressure. But there are some genetic things that we see, enriched in the Black population. They don't explain the differences that I'm seeing in mortality, and they don't explain the concentration of heart attacks in the African American population. But we do have some genetic diseases that we've studied, things like sickle cell, things like this hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. That's actually not just in blacks; it's in blacks and whites. The difference is that we see the NBA and the NFL that are enriched for African American populations doing high intensity sport. And so when you have this thing that's common to black and white, but you're doing high intensity sport, you're going to see more bad outcomes in the groups that are doing that high intensity sport. So it's exactly as you said, there's gene environment interactions, and we shouldn't. I think it's poor to emphasize the genes when it's like the environment that you're in that presents the differences. But yeah, there are some genetic things, but they don't explain the large differences that we see between races.
Thank you. We have one more question. Can you talk a little bit about heart murmurs?
Yeah, so a heart murmur is when when a valve is so there are these valves that allow blood to go in one direction through the heart, and a valve's like a door. It allows sort of blood to go from one part of the heart to the other part of the heart through this door. If that door gets too tight, or if that door gets leaky, you'll hear the rush of blood through it. And so that's a murmur. It's like you hear the rush of blood going through the heart when through the door, because it's either too leaky or it's too tight. There are some people that as we get older, there's a common disease called aortic stenosis where one of the heart valves is too tight. There are some folks when they're really young, because of genetic causes, the heart valve gets too tight, but it can also get leaky. You'll oftentimes get short of breath. Sometimes you'll get chest pain. Sometimes it'll just be silent. And so that's just an opportunity to manage it earlier. If you have a heart murmur, that merits a conversation with the cardiologist to say, this is a benign thing, or this is something that we need to follow, or this is something we need to treat.
In that same vein, my grandmother had a heart murmur. Will that affect me as I get older, or even my mom?
It really depends on why she had a heart murmur. If it's some people, the heart valve door, one of the aortic valve is one of the main valves of the heart, has these three parts to it. And some people, there are only two parts. It's something called a bicuspid valve. If that's the reason for the heart murmur, that's genetic. And so then we typically will have first degree family members screened for it.
In first degree, you mean first tier under that next generation?
Yeah. So first degree is anyone that's like sort of directly related to you, your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your kids.
Oh, so it's okay. Got it. I thought it was more, offspring or directly related.
Yeah.
Are you taking new patients? Are there
I am, but yeah.
Okay. Definitely you can look up Dr. Gousset at Mass General. And Heidi Lewis brings up a point here, and I'm sure both of you can speak to this. Is there a difference in generations? My grandmother died at 99 with no health issues, nor was she on meds. And I'm seeing your face there, so go ahead.
I love that. No, I mean, honestly, I want to see more Black and brown people that are 99 to 100. And we're some people are lucky. Some people, they just naturally do the right things, but some people, we don't fully understand longevity science. It's a fascinating topic. I think part of it is staying active. Part of it is, generally speaking, if you stay active and you watch your weight, you're biased to having a better blood pressure. You're biased to having a healthy weight. But we don't fully understand like why some people can get to 90, some people get to 100. And so I think sometimes you're just lucky it's blessed it's in your family. But I think if we can minimize the preventable causes, we can get more people there.
One last question, and I think this kind of will sum everything up when we talked about the silent killer is, my aunt asked this, can one have a stress stroke or heart, I presume she's saying stress stroke or heart attack without knowing it?
So there are two things wrapped in there. So
okay.
Can you have a heart attack without knowing it? Yeah, you can. And so there are some people that have silent heart attacks, particularly folks who have diabetes are much more common, because when you have diabetes, the sugar, it messes up your nerves, and so then you can't feel things the same way. And so that's like one population that I look at very carefully. If they're not doing as much as they used to, or they're not sleeping laying flat anymore, or not doing stairs, that could be because the heart is subconsciously told them to do less. Don't stress me out. But they may not feel that they've had a heart attack. And then we also know that in both men and women, the most common form when you're having a heart attack is to have some chest pressure. But in women, they also have a slightly higher rate of having other forms of non-chest symptoms. And so, that could be shoulder, that could be feel like your stomach isn't hurting, that could be, jaw pain. It doesn't always have to feel like chest pressure. And then can you have a heart attack or what looks like a heart attack? We've seen people with sudden cardiac death from stress. And so this was actually, there's a special word for it called Takotsubo, or stress cardiomyopathy. We saw it a lot, or some of the original descriptions are in the Japanese population, where classically, say your loved one died on this day 2 years ago, and you're mourning them. Some people will see their heart function immediately get weaker, and some people will have sudden cardiac death. But it doesn't have to be a loved one, right? It could be any other stress.
So kind of superficial, and I want to ask one last question of one of my team here, and I've been talking to him about this. We hear the term heartbreak, and I thought about this as we were leading up to this subject.
Yeah,
Dr. G, if you don't mind, because I love I'm earning I just love your candor and everything that's coming out here. Is there a such thing as heartbreak? We're coming off Pulse yesterday, so for about 30 seconds, is there such thing? I mean, because I've seen incidents, I've seen on the news where, they've reported a car accident, someone died, and then unfortunately their father or whatever. And so that things like that can happen.
Yeah, it's not, and we see it. We saw it. I mean, honestly, I remember when I was on the COVID wards, I saw that too. And so the broken heart syndrome, it's the same thing. Can stress lead to a biological change? Absolutely.
That part.
Can your heart go from looking healthy, having no heart artery blockages, to going weak? Absolutely. And we see men and women with it, slightly more women, to be honest. But we absolutely see that the broken heart syndrome is a real thing.
Thank you. Last question, not superficial, but a little bit. Red Bull. This is one of my friends and brothers, and daily, like I do Java, but I know Red Bull has a little more chemicals and stuff in it. And again, we have to say, these doctors have not examined you. We're just answering general questions. But to talk a little bit about Red Bull.
Well, I think any drink that has a stimulant. Some people are just more sensitive to stimulants. And so if you have a, I mean, I could drink 5 cups of coffee and go to sleep, but some people, they'll have a single Red Bull and they'll feel their heart jumping out of it. They'll feel it like, we'll call palpitations, your heart skipping a beat. And you may not metabolize the caffeine there and the other stimulants as quickly. And so you might have higher Red Bull levels than the next person. And so some people are more sensitive to others, or your heart just might be more sensitive to caffeine. But yeah, usually it's not. Yeah, but usually it's these like abnormal heart rhythms that we might see, or extra beats that we might see from stimulants.
Can you also link that to sort of caffeine in general and hypertension? Because that comes up a lot. People who may have pre-existing condition in a sense, and sort of knowing what your baseline is.
Yeah. No. So I don't, like, a lot of people will come to me and they will have really high blood pressure and they'll be like, all right, I'll cut out the caffeine. Sometimes that helps, but not all the time. Sometimes in fact, there are some people that are, caffeine is really influences their blood pressure, but I'll say most people, I don't see that they still need to be treated for high blood pressure, or try another strategy to figure out the high blood pressure. But again, some people just are more sensitive to caffeine than others. but you have to also recognize that sort of a cup of Joe in the morning, or Java with Jimmy in the morning would be very important for your mental health.
We are going to extract that clip out there and use it for marketing.
You're part of the stress. I mean, we've been stressing a lot on this show that, being involved with your doctor can make a big difference, so that you know what is good for you. It can vary a lot from person to person.
Yeah.
And so we hope by now everyone is connected with their doctors, that they have had those baseline sort of checks done, and you can have those discussions, those individual personal questions answered, so that it's not just listening to your friends and your neighbors, because you might be slightly different than they are, in a sense.
Absolutely.
And so I know we're getting ready to close. Do you mind if we go back a little bit to the simple sevens and sort of, is there an order to it? I know this, I think part of this is going to be people who will look at this like, that's a lot to do. If you had to pick one or two, or does it make a difference when you address one of these things? Can you rank those?
No, so I mean they're all important. I think the silent ones are the ones that you don't know about, right? Like, you could have a job that keeps you not being that active. You just don't realize how inactive you are. And so getting up, we talk about trying to get 2.5 hours of exercise a week. That's 20 minutes a day. And how you live your day is how you live your life. So like, try to get those 20 minutes in each day. And then the other silent ones are like your cholesterol and your blood pressure in particular. These are things that we can change. Honestly, we could almost change them today in a clinic visit, right? But certainly if you're smoking, trying to reduce or stop smoking. If you have diabetes, actually, the more active you are, the lower your sugars are. And so I really like to focus on activity and blood pressure. And then it's hard for me not to think about cholesterol, but I think in the African-American community, blood pressure, everyone though should try to get as active as possible. And then those visits with your primary care physician to look at your cholesterol to make sure that you're not in some higher risk category is critical.
Thank you both. Today was, as Dr. Alabre says, amazing, definitely important information. And I learned a lot. And Teresa, I did see your question about pulmonary embolism. I believe that's more of a pulmonary issue, but it is related to cardiology as well. But we are going to have a women's heart health component on Tuesday, March 1st. And we will let you guys know who our guest faculty and clinicians are. Our medical director is working on that. But Dr.
We have someone.
Oh, we have someone? Yes. All right. So we're going to get that information out very, very soon. But Dr. Gousset, I would love at some point maybe to have you back. There was a subject, Dr. Alabre, that looking at the rise of cardiovascular issues within pregnant women. I think that was something that you mentioned. Not like I would know because I'm not in the industry, but I haven't heard about that. And so at some point we probably want to maybe talk about that, but I appreciate you coming. Please share any closing statements and words you would share with the community. I personally want to say thank you for your dedication and passion to this space. And then Dr. Alabre will have you close out as well. We literally have about 2 minutes, guys, because we're a little bit over time.
No, I think it's, again, thank you for having me on. I think this is an incredibly important topic. Again, I think heart disease can sometimes be scary, largely because it can present suddenly. Something can happen very suddenly, and largely because a lot of the things that to fix it are silent, right? And so, coming on here has been a real honor, because I think talking about it and just sort of increasing the level of discourse on sort of the silent causes of heart disease. I hope we can sort of at least touch one person to not only check themselves, but check your brother, check your sister, check your mom, check your dad. Just make sure that everyone is aware of that it's important to look after yourselves, look after your heart health, look after these silent things. What's your blood pressure? What's your cholesterol? Get active.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alabre.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd like to say is that lifestyle really matters. And we've talked a lot about sort of genetics. We know it's a component, but you can do a lot by sort of the life you, in a sense, choose to lead. So there's a little bit of sort of say control in your hands. And so we really want everyone to know that prevention is key, and lifestyle matters.
Thank you all so much for tuning in today. And we will be back with you on Tuesday, March 1st for Women's Heart Health. And just along in this vein, tomorrow we have at 9 a.m., we have a physical therapist and a wellness coach that's going to join me for a conversation. I'm sure I'm going to bring this up because wellness is definitely a part of being getting, well, it falls under, it reduces stress. And being active is a part of wellness. And so thank you both so much for being with us today.
Absolutely.
And they are asking, is there, again, are you taking patients? And so I'll post on the website how you can generally get in touch with, I forgot what the line is called, new patient line at MGH.
The referral line, the patient referral line.
Patient referral line, that one. We need to get that up there. And Dr. G, anything that you would like to pass on to the community, we'd be glad to get, if you want to just write something or just share anything, we'll put it on the website and make sure that it's available to the community.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Thank you both for being with us. Thank you for being with us today. Dr. Labrie, I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds
Thank you
good.
for